Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux here with a review of the Donner Cut. That's right, I'm taking another look at Superman 2, this time exclusively to talk about the Richard Donner Cut, which I do think is the superior version of this film. It not only matches the tone better with the original Superman, the movie, it has scenes that are just simply better, smarter, well written, better acted, and more consistent overall in how the characters are represented, most noticeably with the character of Lois Lane. It seems very apparent to me that Richard Lester did not think much of Margot Kidder because he diminished her intelligence and agency in Superman 2 and flat out wrote her out and had her parading around with a bikini in hand, making her just seem so vapid in Superman 3. None of that was authentic to the character of Lois Lane as shown in Superman the movie. This seemed to be a director reflecting his feelings upon a person, or even the character, it doesn't matter which. Honestly, it's just disappointing to see that happen through that director's works. Watching this version of Superman 2, Lois Lane has the intelligence to start piecing together on her own that Clark might be Superman, tries to prove this is the case. It doesn't pan out, but when Superman shows up at a key moment later in the Niagara scene, she decides to double down on her suspicion and plays a stab at trying to reveal himself and gets Clark to reveal himself through her own cunning more than anything else. And it's so exceptionally well played by Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve that it's shocking that this would not have been how the reveal happens in the original cut or in the theatrical cut of the film. Why Richard Lester chose to do this seems to be out of spite more than anything else, because it's baffling to me. And the fact that those scenes as presented in Superman 2 the Donner Cut are had to be extrapolated from audition tape footage, which is why hairstyle, makeup stuff doesn't necessarily match, including eyeline, yet it still works because it's so well written, so well acted. Your mind is willing to overlook some of these inconsistencies because it's simply that good. You get a little bit more with some of the action. A lot of the stuff with Zod and his minions is pretty consistent through both films. And unfortunately, because Donner didn't get to finish making the movie, unlike certain other famous director's cuts or alternative cuts that are out there, he couldn't go back and reshoot stuff for his version here. He had to work with what he had, and unfortunately some of what he had was stuff Richard Lester shot. That stuff does kind of stick out pretty noticeably. But the long and short of it is, the stuff that works here works infinitely better than anything in the Lester cut that is specifically Donner v. Lester. And it's a mark of how much better Richard Donner understood this character and how seriously he took it. Now, that's not to say this film is overtly serious. I think it is a little more so than the previous film, but that's just due to stakes rather than anything else. It's a treatment of this character in a fully believable and grounded way that is absent from anything Lester touched. And it goes back to the word, the verisimilitude, or verisimilitude, as we get with this film. And this is where I want to start drawing parallels to the same world's Superman that we got also in 2006. This Donner cut took over 20 years to fully come about. And it only came about as a response to internet fandom, and also the fact that Superman Returns was coming out in theaters, and they wanted to pump this out as well. Now, drawing the parallels between this film done by Richard Donner and that film done by Bryan Singer, it's also noticeable how the absence of verisimilitude can harm the character. Bryan Singer, as established with his X-Men films, doesn't seem to be a comic book fan. He drops any life out of them, he saps them of color, he saps them of any visually compelling elements, which is strange because comic books are a purely visual medium. It is storytelling through pictures. There are words that are also on the page too, but that's almost secondary, especially in the Marvel method, so those X-Men movies and books in particular. And yet, he is responsible, in a lot of people's minds, for bringing about the modern superhero popularity. But I argue that that's not the case. I argue that Sam Raimi, with his Spider-Man movies, yeah, X-Men came out 2 years prior, but Spider-Man cemented people's interest in this world and this aesthetic. And if you look at it, Sam Raimi understood the assignment. He used verisimilitude to ground Spider-Man. It's sensational. It is a drama, but it's fun, it's vibrant, it's colorful, and more than anything, he captured what it felt like to read a comic book. You don't get that with Bryan Singer's X-Men, or even X2, which is a better movie. This isn't necessarily a condemnation of those films, but it's just taking a look at approach to directing and approach to character. Bryan Singer doesn't have belief in the X-Men. He doesn't have belief in Superman, which is why he tried to make him gritty, grounded, and real in terms of our more honest approach to drama filmmaking, and he came out of making crime thrillers like The Usual Suspects. Visually, both Superman Returns and his 2 X-Men movies that started this trend are a lot more similar to the visual languages you got in The Usual Suspects or Apt Pupil. Sam Raimi harkened back to not only his own style, but also Superman, the movie by Richard Donner. And so much so that he gives it a visual quote when Spidey is running and then opens up the shirt to reveal the spider symbol underneath. He approached Spider-Man with verisimilitude. And I will make an argument right here and now that people wanted that more than anything Bryan Singer delivered. And you can see that with No Way Home, and the response when Spider-Man shows up in that film and it's Tobey Maguire, and the villains that were all over the marketing campaign of that film. And I will go one further and say that this is honestly going to be reflected in Deadpool, where for the first time ever we have Wolverine in his full glory, comic book accurate costume. So the approach of verisimilitude and the belief in these characters and the storytelling and this medium is so important in how you can make a movie work or not work. You can look at Superman 2, both cuts of the film, and one of them is honest and true, and the other one seems to have artifice and wants to strip characters of their character and make them look like fops or characters from funny books as they see it, and not honest, true people. It's due to approach. You can also use Superman 2 and the Donner cut and Superman Returns to make this same comparison. There didn't seem to be something that worked right with Superman Returns, and it's because it doesn't capture the visual language or visual approach that Richard Donner went for. He went for Bryan Singer went for much more of the same approach he did with the X-Men movies, stealing color away, shooting it as if it was more of a crime film, and yet he wanted to give you the aesthetic of Donner's Superman. So it just reads weird and like oddly brown and gray. And you watch Superman and Superman 2, or 3 and 4 for that matter, and there isn't that aspect to it, except for when Superman goes dark and evil in Superman 3, and that's more of a reflection of the dark side and the light side. Just something I thought I'd throw out there. And while we're on the subject of Superman 2, or Superman Returns, I did want to talk about one other thing. In that video that I did for my review for that last week, I hinted that there was something that I would address in this, and that came twofold. One is the lack of verisimilitude in Superman Returns, but the second is that this film, Superman Returns, the Donner cut, or Superman 2, the Donner cut, is definitely the better cut of the film. In my opinion, this is the only way to watch Superman 2 anymore. And that further makes Superman Returns harder to watch, because Superman Returns operates on a world that exists with Superman 2, the Lester cut. Because at the end of that film, if you remember, Superman magics away her memory through a kiss. And then 5 years later, we get the jump, which is Superman Returns. Superman comes back, and Lois has a kid. It's their own, and it's from the magical night in this film, Superman 2, that happened, that came to be, that the son was able to have his own son. And this film has an ending, depending on how you look at it, where Superman yet again goes around the sun, or goes around the earth, spins around, and reverses time. So it makes it impossible for Superman Returns to happen. And Kevin Smith has that great little stand-up bit where he's talking about Superman Returns, and his thing that he really bumped into is, how come Lois isn't furious with Superman for violating her? If he stole her memory in Superman 2, and she doesn't have any memory of being with this man anymore, then when the fact that she has Superman's child is kind of effed up, and how come she isn't upset about it? That's something that's never addressed in Superman Returns, and it drives me nuts. This film, I'm not in love with the ending of turning back the sun, or turning back time once more. He'd already done it with Superman the movie. I understand that was the original ending for this film. When he had made the two films together, he just lifted the end of this, put it at the end of the first one, just to give that first one a ending and a grand sense of like closure to that story. And if you've done it, then you have to not use it again in the second movie. You can't do it. It would have been like, well, I guess this is a bad example, but George Lucas taking the end of his Star Wars script where the Death Star blows up, putting it at the end of Star Wars, knowing he's going to make another one. And like, imagine the Death Star blowing up instead of Return of the Jedi, but in Empire Strikes Back again, like just one movie later instead of 2 movies later. It doesn't work. It loses impact, and you're just kind of rolling your eyes. What's frustrating, though, is that this film has a natural end point that every time I watch it, I just stop it there, because I don't need Superman to reverse time. The ending of this film is when Lois and Clark have their moment, and they mutually agree that this romance, it can't be. And tomorrow when he shows up at work, that's all he can be for her, is her co-worker. And she has to accept that, and she does, and it's a beautiful moment. And then she watches Superman fly out of the shot, And then she has that beautiful moment where Lois says, "There he goes, up, up, and away." And then the camera like pulls back in like this helicopter kind of shot. And you see her loneliness. It's something that weirdly is almost identical to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, which would have come out 2 years prior to the Donner cut. So it's just a great minds think alike, getting back to that verisimilitude and honest grounding of these characters and what it takes to end the film. That is the end of the movie for me. This quiet, somber moment of two characters being adults and recognizing that even though this is so perfect, it cannot be. And they have to acknowledge that. And Superman has to soup, and Lois has to live on knowing what this man that's across the desk from her is, as she watches this man fly up, up, and away. That is the end of the film. That is a great moment. It does not need anything further. That's the end. And I urge you, if you ever watch the Donner cut, after she says up, up, and away, and as the camera pulls back, hit the fast forward button or the skip chapter button, credits. It's much better to watch it that way. But I give this movie a 3.5 out of 4 stars. What do you think of the Donner cut, the original like fan cut that we finally got out there? I don't even dare say the other word. We'll touch on that movie at some point. But up next for my DC movie reviews, we're moving away from the standard superhero fare for a deep dive into a Neil Gaiman work, which is Stardust. I've seen this film one time, back when it first came out, and I'm excited to revisit it. So you'll have that review hopefully next week. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.